Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis. When it comes to primaries for mayor, few people know the terrain better than Bill de Blasio. He was the 109th mayor of New York City. He served from 2014 to 2021. That means he knows exactly what is going on with today's candidates in these final days before the election when you decide. He also understands the challenges that the eventual winner will face when they step into City Hall. So the primary is just around the corner. Perfect time to check in with our old Monday night Inside City Hall regular and former mayor. Good to see you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you, Errol. You know, your intro reminds me of the famous music saying, you got to live the blues to sing the blues. So 8 years in City Hall taught me a thing or two, let me tell you.
Well, the campaign trail is the fun part, or supposed to be anyway.
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
You won 2 primaries for mayor. What are the most important things in this final week that the candidates should be doing?
Look, in the end, people want to know who's on their side. So, I'm very clear the number one issue is affordability. This town has gotten almost impossible to live in for a huge swath of working class, middle class, and low-income folks, obviously. And they want to hear from the heart who's going to take care of them, who's going to look out for them. And look, I'm an optimist about humans and about voters. I think there's been many attempts to win them over with scare tactics. Donald Trump tried to do it in 2024. Andrew Cuomo's trying to do it right now. I don't know what's going to happen in this primary, but I do know I think people are increasingly able to see past that and get to what really matters for them. So the candidates who speak to affordability with passion and show people that they get it, they see it, they feel it, and they've got something they could do about it. Mm-hmm. We with us, it was pre-K for all. It was, my number one thing, tax the wealthy for pre-K for all. I talked about it 1 million times. It was from the heart. People could tell I was real. And that's what you got to do in the final push. They have to feel you.
Does it have to be just that side of the equation? I mean, because affordability, they were talking about this in the 1950s. People were, saying, I'll keep the nickel subway fare or whatever it might have been. There is another side to it, which is to help people make more money so that they can sort of handle it that way. Does City Hall have those kind of tools to really sort of dig into that?
Not as much is the truth. Look, I fought for, and we ultimately won at the state level, $15 minimum wage. You'll remember we did it for city workers first. That helped force the hand to Albany. And we can do a lot for the 400,000, almost 400,000 folks who work for New York City to make their standard of living decent, good wages, good benefits. We can do a lot in terms of improving on the margins, things like we did paid sick days, for example. That did help people have a little more. You can put money back in people's pockets. That's what pre-K and 3K did, and obviously affordable housing programs. But if you say, can you simply, make people earn more money? Well, I think a number of people would say you can foster a strong economy, right? So there's more jobs, and in theory, the stronger the economy, the better opportunity for people to have a higher income. I think there's truth in that. I think a mayor can do some of that. For example, obviously, public safety matters in that equation, quality of life. Schools matter immensely in that equation. Both businesses make a lot of decisions on the quality of education in a particular place. But I think it's fair to say at this moment, because the crisis is so severe, it's not, who wants to hear about, we're going to build a better economy one day, right? I don't blame them. I think they want to know, who's going to give me help right now?
Well, dollar for dollar, when we look at what Bill de Blasio did for the working class and so forth, nothing came close to settling all of the municipal contracts. They had all been allowed to lapse under your predecessor, Mike Bloomberg. And just by settling them, and I don't even remember what the range was. It wasn't extraordinary, but it was the 3 to 6% range or something like that. And it translates for hundreds of thousands of workers into billions and billions of dollars into middle-class pockets, right?
Mike Bloomberg, who, by the way, is trying to buy his 4th mayoral election right now with the $5 million he's given Andrew Cuomo, Mike Bloomberg literally did not care that he had 400,000 hardworking people who work for the city. Didn't matter. You could be a teacher, cop, firefighter, clerical worker. All were treated the same. None of them had a contract. They were waiting for back pay for years and a higher wage standard. You're right. Just that act alone put a ton of money in people's pockets and helped everyday people to have more chance of living here. So mayors have a lot of tools, but I think what I'm saying to you is, the big economic planning, absolutely, we want to have the biggest, most diverse economy. A mayor can have an impact. But what I think people need right now is those sharp solutions. Example, when Zoran Mamdani talks about free buses, which is not a radical idea. It's being done around this country and around the world.
Yeah.
That's something an everyday person who literally is thinking, I don't have another $5 or another $20. But if they know they can get around on the buses for free, they're going to feel that. And it's a believable solution. If anyone says, well, how are you going to pay for these things? That's always something we have to take seriously. And I believe in this moment in history, you can, at the state and local level, tax the wealthy more because they're making out like bandits. Obviously, rich people got richer in the pandemic. Obviously, they're getting a huge tax cut from Donald Trump. But the point here is there are big, bold ideas that can help people right now, just like we did with Pre-K for All. And what's the response you get from Andrew Cuomo and his allies at the New York Times editorial board? No, it's big, it's bold, therefore it's impossible. It's big and bold, therefore it's irresponsible. You know what? If I listened to them, we would not have Pre-K for All. I can't tell you, Errol, I cannot tell you how many parents come up to me, like daily occurrence.
Sure.
Every ethnic background, every income level, every borough, and say, thank you for Pre-K, thank you for 3K. It changed our lives. It saved us a huge amount of money. It helped us stay in New York City, that kind of thing. That's what people want.
No, I'll tell you, right here in our newsroom, where we have a lot of young mothers, there's a fertility wave sweeping through our newsroom.
Congratulations.
And they keep those listeners coming, keep those viewers coming. But they are all, without exception, the young parents are like, it would change their equation fundamentally if they didn't have Pre-K, 3K.
Just quick rejoinder.
Yeah.
When I announced it, Michael Bloomberg, famous quote, Michael Bloomberg said, he wants to drive everyone out of New York City because everyone in his view was the wealthy who would pay the tax. Andrew Cuomo tried to stand in the way of it and tried to use every tool he had in the book to stop us from getting the tax to pay for Pre-K. And the New York Times editorial board said it was impossible and that's why people shouldn't vote for me. So these pillars of the establishment all together again, Bloomberg, Cuomo, and New York Times editorial board telling us we can't have free buses now. Or we can't have better child care. Well, they're wrong again.
One thing I would say is Pre-K, 3K could not exist other than as a universal entitlement. In other words, the rollout, and it would have been problematic in 1,000 different ways if you tried to means test it in any way.
And I never thought we should. I agree with you.
And I feel the same way about these buses. It's like you can't do a couple of experimental lines. Either you make the system free or it's not free. If it's
you can phase it in. I think because this is, with Pre-K for All, we went blitzed over 2 years. We brought it to full strength. With 3K, we didn't have the money at first. We did it in phases. We chose a couple of districts, one in Brownsville, one in South Bronx that were in greatest need, and then another district. So you could do free buses in parts of the city to start the thing rolling and build it out over a reasonable period of time to the whole city.
Yeah.
But the point being, this is something that could really change people's lives, and it can be done. So when this access of the status quo tells you that things are not possible, just immediately don't believe them because they don't have history on their side.
Well, yeah, I mean, and look, it just bears some studying, right? You got to do it sensibly, you got to do it logically. I mean, what little experience we do have actually, which probably should get more attention, is I remember when they created Gutman, the newest of the community colleges. Yep. And they made CUNY made a serious attempt at trying to get people to finish their degrees and so forth. And one of the things that came up was that people were not enrolling or people were not completing their degrees in part because they couldn't get there. They couldn't pay for mass transit.
Yep.
So giving out free Metro cards boosted completion by a measurable amount. I mean, it's like a $3 subway ride, 4 times a week was actually, the axe, the cutting line for those who could finish and those who wouldn't. And, we should probably build on that.
If you spend time with real New Yorkers, for example, if you don't live in Westchester County or have spent a lot of time living in a governor's mansion, if you actually spend time with real New Yorkers, you hear exactly what you said, the thin margin that people live with all the time. I will tell you this, and this is the truth. When I went into Gracie Mansion, I still cared if, there was $5 off something, right? If I could save $5, that still mattered a lot to me. You want that in leaders. You want us to feel exactly what everyday people felt. And so I've talked to people all over the city, exactly the example you gave. They couldn't get to a job interview because they couldn't afford the transportation. They couldn't get to community college because they couldn't afford the transportation. Or they couldn't afford the books. Or you name it, the choice that people are making all the time. The classic, do you pay the rent? Do you pay for groceries? Do you pay for childcare? What do you do? One of the reasons we did Pre-K and 3K was so many families They just could never pay for it. And so, a child ends up with auntie or grandma who will love them, of course, but can't give them the educational support, right?
Sure.
But this is not just the poorest of the poor. This is working class people. This is even people who, in those quaint days, a decade or more ago, thought they were middle class. I don't think a lot of people have that illusion anymore. We now know so many middle class New Yorkers feel their economic reality is tenuous. So my point is, every form of relief, but right now, not one day, right now is what people will be voting on. They're looking for help now.
One of the big issues that has come up, that it's mostly aimed at Zoran Mamdani, although he's not the only one this would apply to, is that because he hasn't run anything even remotely as complex and large in number of employees as the city of New York, he's not ready, he's not tested, he can't do it. Now, as a threshold matter, it's interesting because nobody runs an organization as big as the city of New York, right?
Right. We have a little circular logic there.
Well, no, I remember in particular Ray McGuire when he was like the number 2 at Citigroup, right? Which is a global organization, and you count up all of their employees, and it was like 200,000, including like in Indonesia and China and everywhere else. And I was like, yeah, nobody's run anything as big as the city. On the other hand, there are some distinctions to be made here. Now, in your case, I guess the biggest thing you had run at that point was the public advocate's office.
Well, no, I had public advocate's office. I had run in a different sense, the 2000 Hillary Clinton Senate campaign. I had been the regional administrator for HUD. For a couple of years.
Maximum employees in whatever job?
Probably, it's either HUD or the Hillary campaign, somewhere between 50 and 100, so it's not a lot, obviously.
Right.
But here's the point I would make. I'm going to take you back to one of our better mayors, even though I think his last term was not so good, but Ed Koch did some really great things, particularly on affordable housing. What had he done before? He was a reformist district leader. That's how he came to fame, taking on Carmine DeSapio, one of my favorite names in your political history. And then he was a congressman with a few office staff in New York and a few in Washington. He actually turned out in many ways to be a very good manager and administrator. A lot of people would say he's one of the best examples. The very best example of all time, there's only one, Errol, was a congressman.
Yeah.
So it makes no sense to say, and by the way, Mike Bloomberg, he ran a big company. He did some good things for the city. He also doubled down on the status quo and made sure that we didn't address income inequality in the city. Mike Bloomberg set us back in a lot of ways. So Rudy Giuliani set us back in some ways, did some other things too. You can't say there's this perfect model of experience that makes you a right to be mayor, and that experience is value neutral. Let's take it back to the New York Times editorial board. Their subtextual message: vote for the corrupt experience guy. Vote for Cuomo. And I said during the debate, the experience Cuomo's talking about, if that means harassing his female staff members and sending seniors to their death and lying about it, that's not experience I want. So here's my message about Zoran or about Brad Lander or about Adrian Adams. I like their values. I like their understanding of this city. I like their ability to want to move the levers of government for real change. And this notion that somehow change can't happen, we're being sold a bill of goods here. This is absolute. I'm sure I can't say bullshit on this.
You can say whatever
broadcast.
you want.
It's absolute bullshit. Thank you. The NBC censor won't get us here, right? No, it's bullshit because in the end, you could easily have said about me, I didn't have some vast managerial experience. Therefore, I could never get us pre-K for all and 3K for all. But I had will. I had the ability to help capture the imagination of the people because it's something I believed in passionately. I had the ability with a great team to organize at the grassroots and politically to create the momentum. When you look at, I'm going to take the example of Zoran and the free buses. Does anyone doubt that this guy could energize people to fight for this in Albany and provide the kind of leadership that would cause, real movement in Albany? They would have to pay attention. I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm not saying Brad or Adrian are perfect. But don't disqualify people who want to change things because they don't have some ideal preparation for mayor that literally never existed. The best of all time, Fiorello, did not have the perfect preparation.
Well, I mean, also as a practical matter, you were probably better at running meetings and organizing your day after a while than you were when you came in the first day.
Thank you. The other thing is, and this, by the way, talk to every president of the United States and ask them about the difference between year 1 and year 4 and year 7. You are going to have to learn on the job. You're going to have to learn on the job. And one thing you can do, at least, is try to give the city a sense of direction and try to give them a sense of hope.
Sure.
But in terms of the levers of power and the managerial reality, here's a big question. Do you have the capacity to learn? Can you listen? Can you grow? I think some of these candidates have clearly shown that. I think others may be stuck in their ways.
Okay, very interesting. Speaking of stuck in their ways, could you say a word to the current mayor about the benefits of actually talking with political journalists, even if it's uncomfortable at times?
Let me testify my own mistakes.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to, I respect Eric and I've known him a long time. I'm not here to lecture.
I've not had him on here in months.
Well, first of all, you're a charming host, and I think he must misunderstand.
Thank you.
You're so charming.
Thank you.
We never had a disagreement once. I was never frustrated. There are no holes in the wall at City Hall after our interviews.
We worked through it. We had our differences, for sure.
But here we are. No, seriously, I made a mistake. I felt I had the bunker mentality at a certain point. I felt a lot of the questions were mean and degrading and uninformed. And so I pulled away and I listened to some advice from some people who said, more and more the model should be expose yourself less. And that was a huge mistake. And I never would have known it was a huge mistake. And I want to take that on me. I'm the decision maker. So shame on me. I listened to the wrong people. Here's the irony of what I learned. People still talk to me about being on your show. They talk to me about being on Brian Lair's show every Friday on WNYC, how much they liked the openness of those environments. It made them feel closer to me. I never got this until after I was out of office. People said, I felt closer to you as a leader because I heard the questions being asked that I cared about, or I even got sometimes to ask them myself, right? But then, God forbid, I wish we had never, obviously I wish we never had the pandemic. But one thing I learned from the pandemic, we started doing the daily press conferences. And they were grueling. And we didn't always have the answers. But what I did appreciate was I saw the difference in the media when they were given enough access and given enough opportunity. The tonality changed. And I had to reflect on that and realize that if people were trying to do their job, I didn't always love the questions. I thought they could have done their research sometimes better, but they were trying to do their job. And if I helped them do their job and made myself available, there actually would be more mutual respect and sort of understanding, openness. And I also in the pandemic started to realize sometimes a journalist, for example, would say, there's a vaccination center that, there's a long line, or, someplace was supposed to provide testing and there was no test kits available, whatever. And instead of saying, how dare you, or that's impossible, I would be like, thank you, because we need to know that. And we need to go fix it. But I think I had the wrong attitude in the beginning because I came in probably idealistic. And, as you know, I have a family with many journalists in it over the last few generations. Probably came in thinking like, hey, guys, we all agree we're trying to make the world a better place. And then I kind of felt hit by a 2x4. But I realized, and I would advise us to any mayor, the more you make yourself available, you actually will have a better relationship with the public and a better relationship with the press. Now, you can't do it all the time, but try as much as possible. If you can do it every day, that would be the ideal.
Yeah. And many of your predecessors, and Ed Koch again comes to mind, seriously tried to do exactly that.
He also enjoyed it in a way that probably none of the others ever could possibly compare to.
That is true. That is true.
But it worked.
Right.
It worked.
One of my great memories as a Cub reporter, I think I was about 22. I just gotten out of college. And we started the old community newspaper, the City Sun.
Yeah.
And he invited a bunch of us over for lunch. At City Hall, down the spiral stairs. I don't know if you used it as a lunchroom, but he did.
Yeah.
And we had sandwiches, and Ben Ward was there. He's the police commissioner at the time. And he sat there and argued with a bunch of 20-something scrub reporters from a startup newspaper for about an hour and a half, And he gave as good as he got. We went at it. It was an interesting kind of a conversation, but a totally different era.
He loved arguing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or including with himself. So now look, thinking back to 2013, and I moderated a bunch of forums that year.
God
off camera,
help us.
Many of them off camera.
I haven't recovered yet.
Well, you settled on, here's how I remember it. You settled on 3 promises that yielded political benefits. You were going to end the stop and frisk era.
Yep.
Tax the rich to pay for universal pre-kindergarten. I wrote this without notes, without research. and build 200,000 units of affordable housing.
Yep.
How did you develop those ideas? And I specifically would like you to help me confirm to my audience that there is a benefit to talking with these candidates early on and helping them shape a program, because sometimes it ends up becoming policy.
I'll very quick on each of the three. Stop and frisk, I'm public advocate. It was starting to emerge as an issue. I didn't really get it at first. And a minister in Queens, in Southeast Queens, said to me one day, more and more people in my community are talking about this. And he said, I didn't really get it until there was a community meeting called, and I was on my way to the community meeting. And this guy was in his 50s or something. He says, on my way to the community meeting, and I myself got stopped and frisked. And that just was one of those moments that grabbed me. And then from there, getting involved with lots of folks who believed that it was backwards, that was actually causing a rift between police and community. It was obviously degrading to young men of color. It was not making us safe. And then started talking to the experts. That's part of what Bill Bratton and I bonded over. As I started to get to know him early in 2013, he was like, he said, this is like chemotherapy. If you use it the right amount, that's one thing, but if you use it too much, you'll actually kill the patient. So, it was like a combination of everyday people, experts, listening in communities. With the 200,000 units of affordable housing, I had some background in affordable housing. I talked to a lot of people. We believed that the city was aiming too low. And I called a former HUD secretary who I respected. And I said, what do you think of this proposal? And he literally said, Bill, that's this close to insane. But the more I talked to not just activists, but policy folks who said, look, we need to do things differently, the more I believed it could be done. By the way, by the end of our administration, 200,000 apartments had been either subsidized or built or financed. So that was doable. And finally, Pre-K for All, my favorite, because that was on the back of a napkin at Bar Toto in Park Slope, Brooklyn, with one of my key policy folks, Ursulina Ramirez. And one day we were sitting there talking about the platform, and we started talking about pre-K, and up to then it had been very limited, and a lot of it was half-day seats, which are insane and don't do anything for kids. Mm-hmm. And we said, why don't we actually do the math? And we pulled out a napkin. We started doing the math. How many kids in kindergarten? Okay, let's assume a few less. How much of that? And we started doing it, and then we started calling around. And the untold story is there were numerous people in the Bloomberg administration, who shall go nameless, who, so long as they were not divulged, were willing to help us build a plan, because they thought Bloomberg was wrong on pre-K. They thought he didn't get it and he wasn't trying hard enough. And so we had some insider information to help build it. And then it was a decision, how to tax the wealthy. We borrowed actually a lot of the formulations from Safe Street, Safe City with David Dinkins in the early 90s, which got approved by Albany. And as you may remember, I announced it at an Abney breakfast, which did not bring a warm reception from some of the Abney breakfast goers. But that was to make a point. I was not going to only go to adoring audiences. I wanted to go to the business community and say, guys, this is in your own interest. Mm-hmm. Pay a little more, have a better school system, help young people. You'll have a better social fabric. You'll have a better future. Some of them got it. Some of them didn't. But that's how these things got built. And a lot of people contributed over months and months. So yes, talking to the candidates, talking to their policy staff, you can move mountains. Some of the people who helped us are the reason we have pre-K today. And hundreds of thousands of kids have benefited.
Yeah. I mean, this is the stuff of politics that I get most excited about, and sort of telling people when I try and explain how it really works. I keep telling them, it's like, listen, you're not going in a restaurant and somebody's going to hand you a menu and you just pick the policies that you like. That's not how voting is done. I mean, or you can wait until then, but you're more the chef than the customer. You need to get in the kitchen and throw in some, parsley or whatever it is, throw in some spices and look at how it's made, because that's the only way you're going to get something that's going to really work. So what do you see happening in the to jump ahead, when this primary is over? There's a very good chance that there will be a Democratic nominee, a working families nominee, a Republican nominee that's already been determined, and people running on independent lines. Sure. Is this going to be a chaotic November, do you think?
I think it's going to be a hard-fought November. I think it's going to be a real general election. Now, anything could happen. But, any way you slice it, seeing how this Democratic primary is intensified, that's going to spill over into the general election. And I think what's actually happening is largely because there was so much distraction from Washington and from Trump. Literally only in the last week or two are people fully paying attention. It's almost like it just started and bang, it's going to be over on Tuesday. That's going to, I guarantee you, a lot of questions are being asked now. Tough questions, a lot of them directed at Andrew Cuomo rightfully, but also I'm someone who admires and appreciates Zorhan, but there are real questions that are going to be asked of him. This ain't over.
Right.
So I think whatever that lineup is, the energy that just has finally been sparked now is going to carry over. And by the way, Eric Adams is a sitting mayor with a meaningful political base. And this ballgame ain't over for him either. So, I think a lot of us who care about politics were really distraught that, January through, say, April, it was way too quiet. It was probably the quietest mayoral election I've ever seen for objective reasons. But that's over, and I actually think the heat will build towards November now.
Okay. Before I let you go, what do you make of this proposal? I think it might even be on the ballot this fall. There's this reform effort to try and move the mayoral election to the presidential year. They're solving for one problem, which is turnout, meaning turnout will go up because when there's a presidential race. I think it introduces an entirely new problem, which is that you don't get to focus on the city because, the thing that's bringing people to the polls is, farm price supports in Iowa or something else. What do you make of that?
I'm with you. I think, I really haven't spent a lot of time on it, but my gut is exactly where you are. Except for this weird aberrant situation with Donald Trump starting on January 20. Historically, New York City mayoral elections have really caused a lot of people to pay attention. And there's been very intense debate. You just talked about 2013. I think it was like 60 forums, for God's sake, separate from the televised debates. There was lots of information flowing to voters. There was lots of ability to challenge candidates. There was lots of ability to develop ideas. You're not going to have that if it's competing against president or governor or whatever the hell else. So I agree with you on it. I'd like to see the biggest turnout possible, but I think there's other ways we can work on that. Certainly, there's been a lot of reform in terms of making voting easier.
Right.
That's going to be helpful going forward, I think, in terms of turnout. Also, candidates in general could do a hell of a lot better job talking to people about the issues they care about and exciting them and energizing them. And so I think there's ways to solve for turnout, but I think if you go into a presidential year, you will lose a lot of focus on the issues that matter in New York City.
Okay. We're going to leave it there for now. Thanks a whole lot, and we will see you on the other side of primary day.
There we go.
Thanks. Do you want more conversations with the people who are shaping the future of New York City and beyond? Check out our New York One podcast channel in the description. And hit subscribe to let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues.